Hello ladies and gentlemen, Willie here. World buffs and the dispelling meta. A good idea that creates gameplay based upon how players interact with it, or an annoying aspect of the game that fosters toxicity and trying to cause as much inconvenience as possible. Let's take this from the basic. Here are our world buffs. Rallying, Cry of the Dragon Slayer, 10% spell crit, 5% physical crit, 140 attack power, 2-hour duration, non-dispellable, available once per 6 hours from Onyxia, 8 hours from Nefarian's Head, per layer per hand-in, and handing in either head will cause this buff to be dropped in either Stormwind or Orgrimmar. Spirit of Zandalar, 10% movement speed, 15% stats, 2-hour duration, non-dispellable, available every few minutes following the RP at the hand-in at Ujambra Isle. The buff drops on the isle itself, as well as in Booty Bay. Diamol tribute buffs, 15% HP, 3% spell crit, 200 attack power, 2-hour duration individually. All of these can be dispelled. Available after completing a tribute run of Diamol, most often bought from other players or players holding an ID to sell these buffs. War Chief's Blessing, 300 health, 15% melee haste, 10 health per 5, non-dispellable, 1-hour duration, available once a player hands in the head of Rend at Thrall as part of a questline. 3-hour cooldown between hand-ins per layer, only dropped for Horde players. Alliance players can get it as well if they're mind controlled. Songflower Serenade, 5% crit and 15 for all stats for 1 hour. This can be dispelled. Available in Felwood from cleansed Songflowers throughout the zone, which have their own quest about how this is done. There's about a 25-minute cooldown between each pickup of this buff per flower. Multiple people can get the buff if they all click it at the same time. Finally, Darkmoon Fair. This gives a number of buffs. The main ones people care about is plus 10% damage or plus 10% intellect. The Darkmoon Fair rotates between Mulgore and Delwyn Forest every few weeks. Non-dispellable, lasts 2 hours. Done from a simple hand-in quest, easily the fastest and safest world buff to get, since starter zones are also not PvP flagged. Well, that's quite a lot of buffs, and as you can see, many are in late game zones. Many of them can be dispelled by opposite faction members. There are loads of different timers on what is dropped when, without even considering layers, and many people put a ton of time and effort into getting all of these buffs each week. Back in vanilla, these buffs were not even remotely used as commonly as today. On top of players being a lot more new to the game, world buffs were initially designed to be more of a short-term reward for having completed something cool in game. At their top end, a guild may consider dropping a world buff to try and push progress on a boss, but the thought of actually doing this regularly wasn't even in anyone's mind back then. Real progression doesn't mix well with world buffs at all, and back in vanilla, people started hearing about top guilds like Death and Taxes, Fury or Nihilum doing laps around the world to pick up all these various buffs to help Naxxramas progress, and it seemed completely wild back then. The thought that people would actually go to that length to gain an edge was truly unheard of. That's all part of the legacy and mystery surrounding Naxxramas as well though. And the lengths people go to these days to make sure world buffs are possible is crazy. For many players' main raids, there is at least some expectation to try and pick up a few of them. I mean, trying to get the Onyxia buff isn't too hard, as it gives a massive amount of bonus stats as well. Well, unless you're a hunter, that is. There's even been an add-on to try and track timers and over world buffs, which certainly helps when it comes to planning what to pick up at what point. There are certainly many easy changes that could be made to make world buffs so much nicer to deal with. Imagine if world buffs dropped on both layers at once, or instead of Rallying Cry of the Dragon Slayer having an 8-hour or 6-hour cooldown, it could just be handed in whenever your guild wanted, so it could be very easily coordinated prior to a raid. At the moment, the only way, at least as I know it works on Alliance, to reset the buff early is to have a Horde priest come and mind control the actual NPCs that give out the quests, and then the Alliance have to kill them, they respawn, and then you can hand in again. And most of the time, no one even stops the priest from mind controlling. If you do, which everyone's gonna report you, and I've seen 1 or 2 people go offline very soon after stopping a mind control. Blizzard have even commented on this a while ago and pretty much said, oh well, it is what it is, we'll just leave it. Imagine if Onyxia buffs dropped in all capital cities instead of just Orgrimmar or Stormwind, so there was less massive lag before moving out to raid, sort of how Heart of Hakar works, where it drops on Ujambra Isle as well as in Booty Bay. Back when I was leveling my Shaman, I got whispers when doing LBRS asking if I was doing the Ren quest in UBRS soon, so I could hang on to the head so that it could be dropped at a time when many players can get the benefit of War Chief's Blessing. Or imagine if Songflowers could be clicked at any time after they were cleansed instead of the arbitrary wait between each click. And even then, everyone has to click at the same time or it will go inactive again. Then again, world buffs are very much optional to your success in a raid. People do it because it makes them perform better, and performing better is kind of fun and totally a normal thing to want to do and aspire to in an MMO setting. There's been so many new social and anti-social aspects introduced to the game because of these buffs. On the positive side, one thing I can think of is players setting up entire networks to sell these world buffs to others. There's clearly a demand, so why not try and sell them? Imagine if you treated world buffs as a consumable that you had to pick up before raids. The prices people sell them for are comparatively very cheap. On my server I can get a summon to a cleared Diamore tribute, pick up the buffs there, and then get a summon to a Songflower for about 17 to 20 gold. For me that's 15% health, 8% spell crit, a flat 15 stats, and 200 attack power for 17 to 20 gold. Imagine how much this would actually be as a raw item you used. Well, it's still a lot more effort, I'll give you that, and you're still at the risk of dispels. Speaking of dispels, now above everything else, I think this is people's main problem with world buffs. You guys on PvE servers, you'll have to let me know what you think. Obviously you're safe from them, but on PvP servers, well, the lengths people will go to dispel your world buffs is nothing short of excessive. There are some real degenerates out there, and nothing I'm about to say is an exaggeration, though some of them happen a bit more often, for sure. So your Songflower and Diamore tribute buffs can both be dispelled, and as of late the war for dispels is getting so much larger in scale. Of course I'm speaking more from an alliance player perspective here, but I have no doubt this is just as much the case for Horde players, though we do have to deal with two dispel classes, Shaman and Priest. You only have one. On reset day on Sunday, being logged anywhere near the centre of your capital city is a pretty easy way to get dispelled. Players will regularly run all the way back from respawn points at Eastvale Logging Camp or Razor Hill to capital cities in a hope of getting one or two players' buffs dispelled. You can't keep your tanks, especially your main tanks, in one place. People prioritise dispelling warriors as their buffs are so much more important than others. If a tank can't keep up with threat because they don't have world buffs and others do, well, that's going to end up being a bad time for everybody. This usually only happens if you outright die though, or go over the buff cap. This means you need trash debuffs up on your warriors and to be ready to CC any anking shaman or priest that res as soon as possible. And speaking of that, there is a hidden buff cap for some reason, which with world buffs you can easily go over, especially as a warrior or a rogue. Not forgetting the hidden buffs like stances for instance. This is just another consideration to keep in mind when you're picking up your world buffs. There are people who will spend literally all evening in Felwood dispelling people trying to pick up the Songflower buffs, and since Songflower has a 1 hour duration, it will usually be the last thing that you pick up, meaning you're gonna have your Diamore tribute buffs active. They will often wait just outside the flight paths where there is a Songflower nearby. Horde do have to deal with Night Elf, Priest and Shadow Meld though, and I can only imagine how annoying that would be. On Dark Moon Fair weeks, people will stay up to the middle of the night to dispel people trying to pick up the buffs from Sage. Once again, no exaggeration, on our first Dark Moon Fair reset in EU in Mulgore, there were guys there at 3 AM dispelling. And now that's the kind of more regular stuff. Now here's the real extreme degenerate stuff that goes on. People leveling and multi-boxing characters that have just learned the dispel ability and camping hotspots where raids pass through in hope of getting buffs off a couple players, especially in Blackrock Mountain near graveyards. People recruiting discords of players whose only goal is to go and dispel opposite faction members and make life as annoying for them as possible. And maybe my favourite one overall is people paying opposite faction members to target dispel someone on their own faction that they don't like by paying them through the neutral auction house. It's funny how people playing WoW are so much older and yet we have such a vastly higher number of people who are willing to do this kind of stuff compared to vanilla ever having. So then, content or griefing. I like to compare this to Phase 2 and World PvP. It's fun if you're doing it, but not if you're receiving it. It's the enjoyment of few at the expense of many. This is my favourite phrase I've come up with to explain it simply. This isn't PvP, let's be real. You're doing it just to annoy other people to the maximum. In fact, it's kind of hard to say it's not griefing when people are staying up to the middle of the night or taking level 12 shamans in BRM just to dispel. It's purely just for a reaction. Sure, it's an extreme example, but even now in Stormwind on reset day, you don't want to be AFK near the fountain in the centre if you don't want to get dispelled. And I can bet it's the same for Horde near Onyhead. Then again, would I actually want changes as a result? Imagine a game where every world buff is physical. That would solve this overnight. How about if world buffs were removed after you enter a raid? Nobody would care about them anymore. Not only this, but it would certainly up the difficulty of the content a bit more. What if Warcraft logs had a separate section where it tracked raids with 0 world buffs, in addition to the usual world buff ones? That one doesn't even require in-game changes to bring about a new form of competition within the game. It all sounds like quite attractive options to be honest, but on the other hand, even though much of this is pretty degenerate stuff, it's not exactly stopping you from playing the game, it's just being annoying because the game allows it. Think of it compared to Phase 2 World PvP. That stopped you from playing the game. People camping flight paths, making you spend 20 or 30 minutes to get inside a dungeon and so on. The thing is, you don't need world buffs specifically, and a couple of them, those being amongst some of the stronger ones, aren't even dispellable like the Oni buff or Kakar buff. The bit I don't like about world buffs is that you're playing a game where you are actively incentivized to log out on your character to preserve world buffs and not actually play the game. I don't think this can be changed, as every buff is paused during a logout. Seems pretty fundamental as for how the game actually works. For real though, it would probably be a better game with easier to get world buffs, or just straight up no world buffs to be honest. But on the other hand, it just doesn't really need to happen in my opinion, not in the same way that Phase 2 needed to change to put an end to world PvP, or that Black Lotus needed to change to make them more accessible. It would be more of a quality of life change, a big quality of life change no doubt, but one all the same, so I'm a bit on the fence about it. Personally, if world buffs didn't exist tomorrow, I'd be fine with that. More of a challenge in Rage, and you can actually play your character prior to raids now, and just less time having to spend gather them up. On the positive side, they aren't exactly required to clear. It creates unique, yes degenerate, but unique player interactions, and allows certain players to min-max harder. Maybe I'm reaching a bit for the positives here, I'm trying to see it from both sides. So, your thoughts? World buffs, good or bad? Dispels, griefing, or content? Let me know below. I do hope you enjoyed this video, and as always, I will see you all in the next one. If you like what you see, give the video a like and subscribe, as there's plenty more to come. As always, thank you all so much for watching. Take care. Bye.